Hi everyone, today's hobby video is a painting tutorial using standard Mechanicus Grey to paint a mighty Baneblade. So the first thing I start with is painting the tracks within the sprue. This is much easier to do than painting on the actual model itself. So undercoating it with Abaddon Black, you can see I've carefully removed all of the sprues which attach to the side of the tracks. That's important because obviously they'll be visible when you assemble the miniature. As for the vertical bits, it doesn't really matter because you won't see them as much. Once that's dry, I then used Gunmetal Grey by Army Painter, or you could use Lead Belcher by Games Workshop. So I'm using a wash, and I go for Track Wash by AK Interactive, product code AK083, or you could simply just use GW's Nuln Oil. With the tracks drying, I then move on to undercoating the entire miniature in Mechanicus Standard Grey by Citadel. You can see I've painted the tank in a whole lot of bits. I prefer to do this so I can make sure that every single part is nicely sprayed with no plastic showing through. You could just spray the entire miniature in place, but I want to be really careful, and you can see I've carefully done every single part separately. Then it's on to dry brushing, and using Dawnstone Grey by Citadel. I'm also using an Army Painter Vehicle Terrain brush. Given how big this model is, you want to get a bigger brush, don't use your tiny little Citadel brushes. But pretty simply, just make sure you dry brush every single part in Dawnstone, picking out the detail of the Mechanicus Standard Grey. Right, now onto applying a wash. I'm using Mig Productions Neutral Wash, but you can just use Agrax Earthshade. Using a detailed brush is then about picking out all the rivets and bolts, any crevices like I am here. You can't apply the brush wholesale, instead you have to use it with a very precise application. What it's basically creating is like an appearance of a bit of dirt and grime building up around all the natural raised areas. It takes a fair bit of time, it took me a couple of hours to do this, but it's definitely worth the effort. You can see as I do that little hatch, I'm doing the outside, likewise these hatches here by the engine bay. If you do too much, I think I do coming up in a moment, just wipe it off with your finger or thumb. Just like I do here. Do be quite careful, don't apply too much. We will dry brush it again so it hides any sort of overflow, but be quite precise as you apply the wash into these recesses. So the wash then dry, it's all about dry brush again with Dawnstone, and I thought it'd be helpful if I just showed a piece which hasn't been dry brushed, which is this central piece obviously here. You can see the blue is a bit brighter. I think the dry brushing also actually catches the texture of the plates as well, the armoured plates. So definitely a worthwhile exercise, and hopefully illustrates the benefit of doing so. Okay, now to paint the road wheels. I'm using gunmetal, I'm using a smaller brush, and try not to get any paint on your nice Mechanicus Standard Grey paint job. Make sure you paint obviously the outside of the road wheels, but also on the inside, because they are visible when it's assembled. So as I said, be careful, don't get any gunmetal grey on your paint job. And then using the same wash, track wash. I think if you get any on the bottom of the miniature, it doesn't matter too much because it's going to be quite filthy once you've mudded this model up. But again, be quite careful and use relevant brush sizes to make sure you apply this quite evenly and cleanly. So with the track wash dry, I then glue and place the tracks. And I'm doing so at this point simply to keep myself motivated. This is a very long job as far as painting is concerned, so it's good to see the miniature come together. Okay, now onto the Sponson weapons, front twin heavy bolters and the autocannon on the main turret. Use Abaddon Black on the muzzles as well as the body of the weapon, and then gunmetal on all the barrels of the weapons. Then use Mephiston Red on all the relevant lenses, and those are on the front twin heavy bolters as well as all the lenses on all the Sponson weapons as well. I'm then using Nuln Oil on all the gunmetal, particularly on all the crevices, and on the heavy flamers I'll be using it wholesale, covering all of the barrels. Then using gunmetal again, I'm simply highlighting all those areas that have been washed and making sure that I do the front of the barrel on heavy bolters, as well as carefully picking out all the parts on the heavy flamers. Quick note on heavy flamers is I've also used Hashat copper on either side of the flamers. There's like these two little join points, and you can see I'm highlighting here using Hashat copper. Right, then next along is using Eshin Grey to edge highlight all of the Abaddon Black across all of the different weapons. Then once that's dry, I then glue and place the heavy flamer Sponson weapons, and I find it much easier to do it this way than painting once it's all assembled. So now to make the lenses really stand out, I give them a light wash of Nuln Oil, and once dry I use Mephiston Red again to do some edge highlighting. When you're doing lenses, pick one top left corner, top right, or bottom left, bottom right, for example, and stick with that. Once that is dry, then use Evil Sun Scarlet on that same edge. And you can see, as I'm doing here, going over the same area. And to finish off, you then mix Evil Sun Scarlet with any white paint, and you carefully apply, as I am here, on the very edge. And you can see how it makes it really stand out, having, as it goes from left to right, being quite dark to very bright on the top right corner. The very last thing to do for these weapons is to give them a bit of a sooty finish, as though they've been firing quite a few rounds or been burning a lot of heretics. So just use a dry brush of Abaddon Black, particularly on the flamers, and a more gentle dry brush on the heavy bolters and also the autocannon, and las cannons as well. And to finish off heavy flamers, use Hachette Copper again to give it a bit more of a browner, bronzy sort of finish. Right, now onto the Demolisher Siege Cannon and the exhaust pipe to the back of the vehicle. I'm undercoating these both with Abaddon Black. I then dry brush them both with Gunmetal Grey. I'm choosing the dry brush here because I like the idea of these being more of a brushed metal finish. And you can see as I do the exhaust pipes, it actually makes it look really smart. And I apply the same principle to the engine compartment. You can loosely see through the grilled area behind the turret. And like with the Sponson weapons, I'm finishing off the exhaust pipe to give them a bit more of a sooty look, but this time using Bahasa Gold to give a light dry brush on where the exhaust fumes have come out. Then I paint all the Imperial Aquilas, which are obviously several across the entire model, using Hachette Copper again. And on the smaller ones, particularly on the side of the barrels and also at the back of the vehicle, I suggest using a shade or a wash again. This time I use Reichland Flesh Shade because it's a bit brighter. So do all the Imperial Aquilas throughout the vehicle. Okay, now to the rear of the vehicle, which there of course is some beautiful detail to be done. So I start off using Fire Dragon Bright to paint what I would see to be two indicator style lamps. I then give them a wash of Cassandora Yellow shade. And I will note here that you'll see down the bottom there that red piece I've done with Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet as a highlight. Then on the Shrine to the Omnissiah, I'm starting off with this great big cog. I'm using Corvus Black as a base coat. I then use Retributor Armor and all of these curvy sections, which are quite pretty, so make sure you do all of them. Then I pick out the Saint using Dawnstone to paint his or her cloak. Then using Mephiston Red, paint the two wax purity seals. Then paint the sword in the Saint's arms using gunmetal. Then pick out the skulls both within the chapel, so to say, and also the Omnissiah using Wraithbone White. Then use gunmetal again to paint the Cogboy skull. And then Bugman's Glow to paint both of the parchment papers. And Corax White to paint the wheel around the skull. Now time to dry brush and shade. So using a very precise dry brush, I'm using Bahasa Gold on the giant cog, a dry brush of Sigmarite on the Retributor armor, then using Reichland Flesh Shade on the skulls, and then using Agrax Earth Shade also on the Oath papers as well. Then using Nun Oil on the Saint to draw out the detail in the Dawnstone Grey, and same again on the Cogboy skull. At this point you can see I'm doing some highlighting with Evil Sun Scarlet on the Mephiston Red wax seals. And of course with the Dawnstone used before and also the Wraithbone, you would do a bit of highlighting just with Wraithbone and Dawnstone again on the Saint and the skull. So hopefully quite straightforward there. Right, it's important to pause and actually realise that the paint job, if you've been following my methodology, is actually complete. And you can see I've applied 3 transfers across the model. So the model's actually finished, as I said, so if you want to just leave it as a nice clean paint job, just straight from the Forge Worlds of Mars, then this is it. However, I of course will go on to weather and streak and muddy the kit. But as I said, important to realise that you've basically finished the Baneblade. There's a couple of details I've added, including the crewman in the top hatch, and also it's hard to see, but there's also a crewman, the driver's window or door is actually open, so you can see me if you look carefully. Right, so now on to weathering, streaking and muddying this Baneblade. Okay, so there are a few methods to achieve weathering, and I've found the sponge method to be the simplest. Using high density sponge, in this case taken from a model transport case, you dab it into your black, in this case Abaddon Black of course, and remove most of it on a paper towel. You then pick on any areas you think would have the most wear and tear. Apply the notion of gradually building up, as you don't want to overdo this too much. Really pick on any corners, edges or protrusions like the rivets. and focus lesser so on flat surfaces, but do apply some weathering here to represent any scratches. Given how big this model is, start off with the entire piece of sponge, and in this case I'm using a 2 by 3 centimeter piece. It's meant to be pretty random sort of process, representing the fact that wear and tear doesn't follow a set pattern. But make sure you do follow a degree of realism, like focusing a lot on the front edges and towards the tracks of the vehicle, as given they're running over into or over things the most, as opposed to the rear, which might not be doing so as much. There will be some instances where you want to apply this more carefully, so simply cut out a smaller piece of sponge and hold in a piece of tweezers. There are plenty of instances where this will occur, particularly on the turret. We need to be more precise, particularly around the crew hatches and doors. And doing the same thing again, this time with gunmetal and using only the tweezers and the smaller piece of sponge. I'm applying onto areas which I want to show the paint has been completely worn off. Be super choiceful here, and as you can see I'm being quite precise. Try to put it on spots or corners where you think it's going to wear straight through to the actual metal, and even use a paintbrush as I am here to do really precise work. Okay, next along the process is by far the most longest part of the painting process, but the most rewarding. You'll need Rush Streaks and Winter Streaking Grime by AK Interactive, product codes AK013 and AK014. You'll also need a fine paintbrush. I'm using my Artificial Layer Brush by Citadel, and also ideally a flat paintbrush or flat tip paintbrush like this one here. And the very last thing you'll need is a white spirit, and I'm just using a product from a British supermarket called Tesco here in the UK. Something I should have mentioned before is you should actually varnish the model before you start doing this process. Because we'll be applying white spirits, which is a solvent, you want to have a bit of resilience in the paint job, so make sure you actually use a varnish before this process. So as you can see, I'm using the Winter Streaking Grime and applying it below all the rivets, nuts and bolts. What this is representing is basically water falling on the tank or rain, and basically forming rust or grime to streak down and slide vertically down beneath each of them. You can see I'm doing different lengths, some are a bit longer than others, some are very long, and for the majority of them I'm actually doing it only on the bolts and rivets. Don't be afraid to put it on any flat surfaces, such as the middle of that armoured plate there. Don't forget to also put on places like underneath the Aquilas, and as you can see here, as I'm doing the front of the model near the headlamps, I'm doing different lengths, as you can see I'm doing here. Then let it dry for no more than about 5 to 10 minutes. Any longer it actually won't be able to come off. What we're doing now is using the white spirits and making sure the brush is only moist, not wet. So make sure you wipe it on a paper towelette. As gently as you can see here, making this streaking grime fade back into the background. Now I think a good way to think is probably be a bit too aggressive to start, because you don't want it to just be standing out too much, as in the grime. There's nothing wrong with having it actually disappear and having to start all over again. And given how big this model is, it's okay to sort of practice. But the key thing is don't let it dry more than 5 to 10 minutes, because basically it'll be stuck on. And definitely have practice. As I said, this model is massive, so you can definitely learn the process as you go through. But as you can see on this Sponson weapon, I've got different areas both on underneath the bolts and rivets and also on the flat panels as well. So as I'll show in a moment, you can see how this will appear once it's dry. Okay, so the first batch of streaking is done on this side of the tank, and you can see it's a very subtle bit of impact. It's only really getting caught when I'm showing it in the light, so I decided to hit it again with some streaking. So same process all over again, different lengths underneath all the bolts and rivets, sometimes on the flat panels, and obviously being quite random. Don't be afraid to go over things several times, and then of course, then again with your white spirit and your flat paintbrush, which is only moist, not wet, you're basically pushing it back into the background and basically forming that streaking effect. Do remember to make sure that some of them are quite heavily diluted, while some of them still retain an element of like a distinct line underneath the rivet or bolt. Okay, then next, using the rush streaks, we apply it a bit more carefully this time, just like we did with the gunmetal before with the weathering. Basically applying it onto some areas where you want it to be sort of really showing the rusty dribbly effect. Use the same process. Definitely go over some spots you've done before with the Winter Streaking Grime, and then again with the white spirit, you're then fading it back into the background. I think it does look really good when it's sort of put out quite randomly, different spots which are quite brown or different spots which are greener or a bit bluer from the winter streaking grime. So just go along with your flat brush and push it back into the background. Okay, nearly there. So now to muddy the tracks, and here you need AK Interactive, Summer Cursed Earth AK080 and Pigment's Dark Earth AK081. Now you basically mix the two products together. I've been very ill-disciplined here, just chuck it into my mixer. What I suggest you do is actually measure them using either some sort of spoon or maybe like a paddle pop stick, just to ensure the consistency as you create different batches. Nothing really to say here except just smash it on. You'll need to use a very unlucky big fat paintbrush, as I'm using an old dead Citadel brush. I think a key thing here is to apply it only to the outside of the tracks. What I mean by the outside is don't apply it onto the inside, because actually if you think about the way a track would work, it would actually be bouncing off from the inside. So where the mud will all sit is on the outside of the track, as I'm doing there, on the road wheels, and of course on the underside of the vehicle as well. Just go along and smash it in there with your big fat paintbrush. So let that then dry for about probably 30 minutes, or until it's obviously visibly dry. Now use another product called Wet-Effect Fluids, AK079. What this will create is actually more of a wet, muddy look. Just using the pigment before with Cursed Earth, it actually makes it look like it's dry mud. So actually adding the wet effect fluid actually creates kind of like a glossy finish. And you can see here it's actually finishing off quite nicely as I mix it together. It's very shiny, and actually once it dries, it actually retains a level of shine in the mud itself. Then what I do is basically apply it onto areas I want it to be appearing as it's still wet mud. I then place the wet mud only on the areas which don't have a chance to be clean, so to say. Where that's going to be is where the tracks first hit the surface, collecting all the wet mud. So as you can see on the left there, that's where I've decided to start. Obviously on the outside of the tracks and also on the road wheels as well. You'll see in a moment when I do the finale video, or the finale footage of the tank, the front of the tracks actually are dry, or only with the dry mud. My thought process is as the tracks move through the wheeled carriage, they're getting clean and all this wet and gooey mud is being cleaned off in the internal workings of the tank. So not much to say here again, but just apply all the wet mud onto the rear sections of the tracks. Of course, doing it only on the outside, the road wheels, but not in the actual workings of the tracks, if that makes sense. But as you can see, I finish off here. I'm actually making sure I do the visible areas of the outside of the tracks underneath the model as well. Right, so after about 7 weeks of work, let's see what this finally looks like. Right, so all finished, well done. Obviously a massive job to do. So this took me about 7 weeks of painting on and off to get finally finished. As I've gone for a single colour paint scheme, it gives me a bit more time to focus on the weathering and streaking, and also the mudding as well. I definitely think I'm going to be using the streaking effect a lot more on armoured vehicles as I move forward painting more tanks, if I wish to do so. So hopefully you learned a lot in this video as well, because I certainly did. And hopefully you enjoyed following me as I paint this, and also this might inspire you to paint your own Baneblade. Anyway, so if you enjoyed it, you can support me with a like, comment, or by subscribing. And if you really want to support me, you can do so via Patreon, and I got a link below. At the end of all my videos, I do a Patreon platoon roll call as thanks to all of my supporters. YouTube is a slow burn income business. I make about 80 pence a day, so any support on Patreon would be fantastic. Anyway, thanks for watching. Patreon platoon, sound off. Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeant Adal, Sergeant Gilliam, Sergeant Merrill, Sergeant Sims, Veteran Brady, Veteran Gibson, Veteran Hall, Veteran Lundeen, Veteran Mitchell, Veteran Witten.